Greetings, my name is Monty Martin.
And I'm Kelly McLaughlin.
And we are the Dungeon
Dudes.
Dudes. It's still hard to do that. Welcome to our channel where we cover everything Dungeons and Dragons, including advice for players and guides for dungeon masters.
We upload new videos on every other Tuesday and Thursdays. And please subscribe to our channel so that you never miss an episode.
And thank you to all of you that are following us along with the live broadcast of this on Twitch. This is our new monthly Q&A series. We have been polling our Patreon supporters. Every month we post a thread on Patreon covering one of many Q&A topics and ask our patrons to submit their questions. Last month we did a video on encounter building, and this month's topic is our character creation clinic. So we have a whole bunch of questions submitted by our patrons that we're going to be going through, answering these up and talking and kind of using them as a springboard for various kinds of discussion. So first of all, a massive thank you to all of our Patreon supporters who either support us on the channel and sent us questions. Whether or not you did send a question this time or not, it's super fun to just look at everyone's awesome questions. Hopefully we'll be able to get to most of, if not all of them, but we did get close to 40, so we'll see, fingers crossed, on how well we get through them all. We're going to be focusing in again on character creation ideas, backstory traits, session zero sort of stuff. So what we did is we kind of went through the questions that were submitted and we've kind of put them into broad categories. So we've got a couple questions about character creation that involve mechanics and character building choices, which we're going to start off with. Then we got a bunch of questions actually pertaining to session zero and building your character's backstory and role-playing. And then we had a few more questions actually about the process of character creation, and particularly with new players and flaws and the like. So we're going to kind of go through each of these categories. We've grouped several questions together because there's a little bit of overlap in some of them, but a big thanks again to everyone who did submit questions. For those of you watching with us on Twitch this evening, feel free to leave comments and questions in the Twitch chat. We just ask that if you do have any questions that you would like us to answer, you might want to hold those towards the end of the stream when we'll be able to fit those in as we have time. If we'll be following along with the chat as we do go, so if there are great comments that relate to the topic at hand, we might call those out. But if you do have a question to add on, we just recommend you hold that for the end if we get the chance to get to that as well.
I'll also add that if you wanted to take part in next month's Patreon chat, well, be sure to join our Patreon, and you can join us on Discord, and we will be posting up every month to let people know what the topic is, and then you can submit questions. So if you are joining us and you are not currently on our Patreon, that is how you get your questions guaranteed to be the first ones answered in these discussions. And we also have just recently added in our writers room once a month chat where patrons can help us with script building for future episodes. So that's been really fun as well.
Yeah, so I think without further ado, shall we dive right in and see what our first questions are?
Yeah, so let's dive into some character building questions. Should I just start right at the top?
Yeah, let's do it.
So we're going to start with our mechanics-oriented questions, and the first one here is from Saxy Pirate. What is the bare minimum of a stat you'd be willing to use for the main class feature? Example, a cleric with 10 wisdom. And I'll start by saying I don't ever give my characters a low stat for their primary feature. It's I don't consider this a min-maxing thing. I just consider this making a competent character. I will, however, sometimes give my second highest ability score. For the example of a cleric, I might give my highest score to either Constitution, or if I'm playing a cleric that is more a front-line cleric, I might give it to Strength. But usually it's going to go to Wisdom. But there is a chance that I would put my second highest stat for the best, but that's the lowest I would go. I would never give my cleric a 10 wisdom or an 8 wisdom because I just feel like then I'm not actually going to have fun playing the character.
I would almost always put my highest ability score as my primary attribute. I don't necessarily think that you need to line up your bonus attributes from racial features for that reason. That said, one of the things that I will say is I am really on board with some of the recent rumblings from Wizard of the Coast and other awesome creators about detaching racial ability, like the bonus attributes that you get from the races in general. I think it's a really good and anti-essentialist stance on race, which, not to go too far into it, I think that it adds a lot of flexibility to character building, and I'm excited about the idea of just that. I think for myself, I'm considering for a future house rule actually just giving player characters a slightly more generous point buy or ability array and just removing racial modifiers altogether. We talked about that in a previous video, but I think that you shouldn't feel bad about making your highest stat your most important one and your lowest stat your least important one. I think that the only exceptions for that is like for characters where it could kind of go either way. Like there's paladins, hexblades, or like Pact of the Blade, eldritch knights, arcane tricksters. There's a couple classes where is it strength or is it charisma? Like it's a kind of a flip between two that you're not quite certain.
Paladin, I would almost always go strength. Oh, like I would always go attack over spellcasting, but I want them to be competent in both.
Yeah. And so I think that it could balance out in either respect. And I think that if you have something very, very specific in mind, maybe there's something, but I don't think we should feel bad about, stacking up the highest ability score for your class. I just do wish that the racial modifiers were detached, so that I think there's a lot of players that kind of have this super min maxi thing to them, and they're like, I have to play a race that is granting me a bonus to my class. And I think that let's just detach that so that people can actually play the character that they have in their mind and not have to be worried about being mechanically penalized for that.
Yeah, who are you to tell me that my halfling doesn't work out every day so that he can wield a great sword?
Yeah, exactly. I think that would be pretty cool.
Peter, next question.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Peter J asked, a wizard gets 2 spells of their own choice at every level. How many do you consider fair he get beyond that? Find during adventures, swap with other wizards, get his payment, and so on. When do you as DM say, okay, that's enough? My answer to this is, as a wizard, expect nothing and hope for everything.
Yeah. I think, like, as a player, you shouldn't expect to get any more spells, but I think as a dungeon master, you should take into account, I love having a wizard playing at my table because it means instead of having to figure out what magic item they're going to love the most, I can drop in a spell book every once in a while with spells that I think are cool. And it's basically me being like, hey, try these out, see if you like them. And I actually remember playing a wizard in one of the first campaigns with Monty, and about, I want to say like level 14 or 15, you basically gave me a book that was like, yeah, you have access to all wizard spells now.
Yeah.
And it just opened up so many possibilities for me to explore.
As a DM, it's a good motivator. And as a player, it's also a good motivator. And there's not really a problem with completing your wizardly Pokedex and having every spell. In fact, achievement unlocked if you do. And I think that achievement is actually a pretty cool one to embrace.
I just see in chat here, there God says, wizards are still heavily limited by how many spells they can prepare in a day. So I've never seen a problem with dumping a lot of spells on them. That's exactly what I think. Like, even when Monty gave me every spell in the wizard list, I still had to choose. It really made it more cleric oriented in the way that I would have to prepare my spells for the day, but I just had access to the whole wizard list. But it also, if you're a newer player, you want to try things. You want to try out new spells. So I see no harm in dumping spells on your wizard.
Douglas R asked us, when and how do you decide to multiclass a character? Is multiclassing worth it in a shorter or low-level campaign? This is a tough question. What do you think, Kelly?
I think it is more worth it in a shorter and low-level campaign. The reason being that oftentimes when I'm playing a long campaign, I can never figure out when I want to multiclass. Everybody, I remember with Sebastian, everybody was like, when you should multiclass into this or this or this. And I was like, but I kind of just want to see how the high level sorcerer abilities go. Even if they suck, I've kind of bought into the shadow sorcerer and I just want to see how it goes. And so I have a harder time. But if I'm playing a shorter campaign, I'm not losing out on the higher end abilities because I'm never going to get there. If it's like a 3-shot, I might make some wild multiclass so that I can try out what that multiclass might feel like. When is the right time to multiclass? That is a very hard question. And I think it very much depends on the multiclass. There are certain classes that I think benefit more from having more of something or less of something. But now we're getting into kind of min-maxy. You could also play with the idea of only multi-class when it feels appropriate in the role play of your character. But that still doesn't really answer the question. That's a really hard question to answer, I think, for specific.
Yeah. I think my general advice is this. The two classes that you're multi-classing together, look at the key breakpoints. What are the features that you really want to have from each class? And then decide which one is the most important to you. Beeline that one and then build up the other class. So for instance, if I was going to do one of the hardest multi-class combos to actually do is also one of the most powerful ones in the game, and that's the Hexblade Paladin. Because you want 6 levels of Paladin, and you want a good number of Warlock levels. So your choice really is, do you beeline 6 levels of Paladin, or do you take 5 levels of Warlock first and then build up the Paladin levels? Because in either case, you need to figure out where you're getting extra attack from, and you want like extra attack. The level 5 breakpoints, like the breakpoints of many classes, are like either when they get a feat, when they get a really important ability like the Paladin's Aura of Protection, when they get something like extra attack, or when they get a new level of spells or like a major subclass feature. So when you're thinking of the combo, think of what the breakpoints are, and then look at where you're actually going to do it. One of the ways to not multi-class is to go 1 level of this, 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 and alternate between the two classes. In most cases, I think you're better to beeline one class and then build up the other class and figure out what the teeter-totter is. So essentially, you're never like... So with my Hexblade Paladin, for instance, I did 6 levels of Paladin, and then I did Hexblade from then on. And that was just how I did it, right? So you kind of figure it out from there.
Benjamin Burke asks, how good or bad is it to consider magic items when building your character? Example, if my assassin doesn't have a weapon of warning, he's going to be really bad. Or my druid might not be great now, but once I get the Staff of the Woodlands, oh boy. I see that this could set up a good story goal for your character, but on the other hand, you both twist the arm of the DM and risk playing a suboptimal character while you're waiting for that item. Thoughts? So, do you want? Can I go first on this?
Yeah,
one?
Go for it.
I think that anytime you build a character, you should build it with the anticipation of enjoying that character regardless. I know that Monty has a tendency as my DM to, I know he's going to reward me magic items and I know I'm going to love them, but I have no idea when. And like, I'm still waiting for one for Wilhelm. But I didn't build my character with the idea of like, he needs a magic item. And I don't think you should, because then if you don't get it, it's going to ruin the fun for you. You should have fun with your character regardless. However, I think that making a shopping list or a wish list and presenting that to your DM is a great idea. Being like, maybe you built your druid and you're like, I love my druid. My druid's great. It would be really cool to have a Staff of the Woodlands. And then the DM gets to say, cool, maybe I'll make a quest for you to get that. And then it happens more naturally. You're not sure if you're going to get it. You don't need to rely on that. You don't need to twist your DM's arm. Just know what you would like and maybe tell your DM. But yeah, don't build your character that's going to be fun, like as is.
I think that you should not expect to, like the wizard, hope for the best, expect nothing. Um, if you get magic items, if you get the specific magic item that you want, that's awesome. And I do think that dungeon masters should give players magic items that they want. I think that it's a great tool in your toolkit, and that, like, if you have a character that wants that, but like if having a specific magic item is a make or break point for your character, like I'll also just say that, like, I don't think getting a weapon of warning for an assassin is make or break. I don't think getting a staff of the woodlands for a druid is make or break. I think for higher level characters, perhaps the only magic item that is important is a magical weapon of some kind, because of how common it, like, resistance to weapon damage is for higher level monsters. So like a fighter is really sad if they don't have that, but that's about it. And I think that, like, you should expect to get some cool magical items, but like your character overall should be competent without them.
Fire Magus writes, "Hi, my question is, in your opinion, what battle strategies can PCs employ to maximize advantage other than as a result of spellcasting? As an example, although I didn't find any elevation advantage rules, I think that some DMs give advantage to characters on roofs using ranged attacks or spells on characters down on the ground. And Baldur's Gate 3 might be using this. Any thoughts on this aspect of the game would be appreciated." Monty?
Yeah. First of all, we have our whole video on creative combat tactics, so check that out as well, where we talk about like non-spell based things. Spells are a big part of that, but I think first of all, things like cover, line of sight, and the environment, things that you can interact with in the environment, are a huge thing. But cover alone, I think, is a very underplayed element of D&D in general. Like the idea that you can hide behind walls to protect yourself from ranged attacks is significant. It probably speaks to the fact that dungeon masters probably underutilize ranged attacking monsters, because on the whole, a monster that can make a ranged attack is exponentially more dangerous than a monster that cannot. I think that just in general, like, a lot of players just are like, the monsters are going to rush us and fight us in melee. And if you look at most monsters in the monster manual, most of them are just going to do that. So
with my answer to the specific example given here, I think so. Going off of what Monty said, with we don't really give advantage, but what I do as a DM is we use the cover rules a lot. If somebody's behind cover, they get a bonus to their AC. If the people on the ground are behind like a short wall and the people shooting at them are above them, then I'm not going to grant the people on the ground cover, because the people above them can easily see them. But the people on the ground shooting at somebody above them, those people above them might have cover. So I actually use the cover mechanics for elevation. A person higher up can much easier gain cover, whereas a person on the ground won't gain cover from somebody who has eyes on them. So that's the way that I rule it, is I implement the cover rules, not advantage or disadvantage. But yeah, for strategies for PCs, there's so many ways to use the environment, and that's like, look for opportunities to do something epic with what's around you.
yeah. Preston C asked, do you ever introduce game mechanics for character traits? For example, I have a character that has a backstory involving trauma, so they can get disadvantaged because of that trauma in some cases. My short answer is, I think you should be really careful with this and work with your DM to decide on what is appropriate. I think a lot of that is more in how the character is role played, more than anything else. I don't really feel the need, like, particularly with very subjective and poorly understood by human science things like trauma. I think it's best to take control of that as a player and role play it, because that's actually something that you have control of as a player. I don't think that you need to necessarily have a mechanical element sort of clamping down on you for that.
The furthest I've ever gone with this was on my last campaign that I was running, which was Out of the Abyss, I had everybody submit to me a character fear, like a deep-rooted fear. And when that fear came into play, I would roll on the they would have to make a madness save to see if they gained a short-term madness. So I didn't give them a major detriment, but I had them submit to me, like, one person was afraid of, I think it was like closed-in spaces.
I remember
So like
you
when
had a character that had a fear of insects. That was hilarious.
Yeah, and he got carried away by spiders. Um, but yeah, I definitely, I had a character at my table who was afraid of closed-in spaces. So there was a part where they were in like a collapsing tunnel and they had to squeeze their way out. And I had him roll on the madness table, and he passed out, and they had to carry him out of the tunnel. So it did have an effect. But it was a wild, fun situation at the table that actually everybody was on board with, and they all ended up having a great time. And he was like, "Oh no! Out of all the chances, I rolled the fainting option of the madness table." And like it was fun because it was random, and it wasn't me penalizing him. It was a random table and a random chance with a save.
But that actually was a specific game mechanic of the campaign. That was for the city campaign where we had the time warp.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Kelly and I ran an awesome campaign a while ago that was set in a single city. It was similar to Drakkenheim, but it was inspired by Majora's Mask and actually, in particular, Edge of Tomorrow. And the premise of the campaign was that the player characters had 3 days to prevent the end of the world, and every time they would fail, they would, or TPK, they would wake up at the same time at 9 a.m. at a tavern, and they could start again. And the only thing that carried over was their level. So they could remember where all the cool magical items were in the city and like all the cool things, but like the whole world reset. And the failure condition for that was that we had a madness and insanity system that basically every player character had to keep a record of where and when they died and how they died and who killed them. And anytime the players encountered the location where they were killed, or a location or an NPC that had previously killed them, or like recurrent situations, they had to roll a sanity check. Otherwise, we would roll on the madness table. And it was really fun because it did end up with like the entire party's, the whole part. Like there was this tenement building in the city that the players kept going back to, and like one time it got invaded by driders and burnt to the ground, and another time it burnt to the ground like 6 or 7 times, and it was invaded by spiders 6 or 7 times, and the player characters couldn't get within a city block of this building because they died there so many times. It was just too awful for them to ever go there again. So
great campaign.
Yeah, it was a really fun warp of a campaign, and naturally, of course, the apex of the campaign, like to solve the time warp, the players had to save the world. The players had to stop the time warp and go through one last cycle without knowing that it was the last cycle. Like they would have no other chances beyond that. It was a lot. That
was a great campaign. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Cormac L. Sullivan writes, backgrounds are one of the only ways of getting tool proficiency, but I am yet to see an example of a tool proficiency in D&D that actually felt like it mattered. Do you have any advice on how I can help my players feel like they made a meaningful choice with their tool proficiency? My first recommendation is to look in Xanathar's Guide to Everything. It's not the most amazing, but it's more amazing than anything that's come out before. In Xanathar's Guide to Everything, there's an entire chapter about tools and how you can use them for your party. Like, I think there's one that, like, with cooking tools, you can, like, maybe with proficiency in cooking tools, I think it was like you can bolster your party with like additional hit points, or I think there was like the herbalist kit, you can make a healing potion during your downtime. And there was just like little things like that. What I like to do is, first of all, take the Xanathar's Guide to Everything option, and then think about elements of the game that you think that player could influence with those tools. I think that something that is underutilized in D&D is downtime. Mm-hmm. And I think that the tool proficiencies, like if somebody wanted to work really hard with their blacksmithing gear and they found like a blacksmith shop and they wanted to spend a week trying to improve their weapon, maybe I'd let them like give an amount of gold, use their tool proficiency, and make a +1 weapon. If they had the skills and time to do so, like that's just off the cuff of my head. I might not actually use that, but like things like that. Try to find a way to be like, how could a player impact the world by using the tools? And look at Xanathar's Guide to Everything.
I mean, these tools proficiencies are usually relevant.
Yeah.
And I think that's because actually the game has done a really good job of making thieves tools relevant by like giving mechanics for traps and stuff like that. And I think that that's why the Xanathar's Guide to Everything stuff is so important, because like that's actually the game's like giving you some guidelines and support for specific tools and how to make them relevant. And I think I would like to see that expanded a little bit more into more options. I think that the other thing that I would just say is that tools are kind of cool, but like kind of like languages as well, they're kind of a take it or leave it mechanic. And so you don't need to feel guilty if it's not relevant and it doesn't matter, because it's like a pretty small kind of part, except for these tools. But like it's kind of small. So like it can be relevant, but like it doesn't necessarily have to be meaningful.
Yeah. Diana asks, alignment question. As a DM, how much weight should you place on your player's alignment? Or as a player, do you think it should be adhered to, or can it be fluid to react to character actions and growths?
We have to be honest, we don't use alignment. Like, we don't really.
I will have an idea. If somebody asks me what the alignment for my character was, I have an answer. But we've actually done a whole video about alignment and how much we don't use it. And we've discussed it in several videos. And I think like we are against alignment policing. And I understand that there's a big case here for paladins and clerics about alignment. But I also think that like,
I mean, I'm so against it that in my campaign setting, paladins and clerics can't lose their powers for violating the tenets of their gods. Like, that is how much I don't care. I'm much more interested in the players like actually doing the things that they want to do, and so like I don't place a lot of weight on it. And as a player, I think that there's more interesting questions like your character's bonds, ideals, flaws, and personality traits. Those are way more interesting things to roleplay because they make your character more complex. Like, I think that ultimately, like, alignment is one of those weird things that is like this weirdly essentialist mechanic that got bolted on to early Dungeons and Dragons that has become a sacred cow. And it's, it doesn't really jive with my style of play anymore. I like characters that are way more complex than like that. And I like worlds that are way more complex than what you can achieve with alignment. Like, I think it's a good thing in retrospect to apply to. Like, even the other day, like Kelly and I were having a conversation about how, you know, Wilhelm is a great example of a lawful rogue and played really, really well. But at the same time, like, the complexities of Wilhelm's character are starting to emerge in the game, and I wouldn't want to squash that by being like, no, Kelly, Wilhelm always must act in a lawful manner, or I'm going to give you XP penalties.
Yeah, and I think in any good narrative, like when we're looking at books, movies, TV shows, video games, character growth and character change is the most interesting part. And I think that alignment can be fluid. And if you are using it, I think you should use it fluidly. But I think letting characters make choices in the moment that contradict their alignment, like the evil character becomes good, the good character does an act of evil. The paladin has the whole situation of like kill one innocent person to save many. And he has to make that choice. And I think that's more interesting than being like, well, my character is lawful good, so he wouldn't kill anybody. But it's less fun to play in that world. It's more fun to play in the world where everything's gray and the choices that you make are going to impact the path that your character goes.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a lot of people get worried about not using alignment because you're like, what are the consequences? And my response to that are like, well, the consequences for doing an evil action come from the world itself, right? Because unless you are going to be the type of dungeon master that thinks that consequences are this thing that come down, like, there are evil people in the world right now getting away with evil. No one is coming to punish them except for the other people in the world. I am like, not to get like sappy and moralistic about this, I personally believe there's no justice in the world but the justice that we make for each other. And so unless people are willing to stand up for justice, whether for themselves or for others, the universe itself will not bring justice for us. We have to make it. So that's kind of an ideology that I apply to my campaign worlds.
If you burn down a courtyard of paladins, then you're going to deal with the repercussions of the paladins coming after you.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. And so because I like that element of reality itself, that's why like I tend to run games in a setting where alignment doesn't matter and nobody knows what the gods are up to. So that allows me to be like, yeah, there's no one, and then that makes the choices of the players, that makes their choices relevant. And I don't have any trouble putting my players in very difficult moral quandaries where it's not about, am I role playing my alignment, but like, is what I'm doing right? Right? Because like, yeah. and when you dispense with alignment, you actually invite those questions in, because when alignment is out of the picture, it's no longer the DM gets to decide what is good and evil. It's now the players get to decide what is right and what is wrong, and the DM gets to decide what the consequences for those choices are. And that makes it way more rich and complex.
Moving on to session 0 stuff. So that was our look at mechanics questions. Now we're moving on to session 0 questions. The first one is from Thex Jackal. During your session 0, how much emphasis do you guys put on talking amongst the group about your potential PCs for party balance reasons, or is that even a concern with your table?
And I just want to add to this that Jason S. asked a similar question of playing with strangers for the first time. How important is it to make sure the parties are going to work together class-wise from a PC point of view? Is it... So I kind of wanted to put those two questions together because they were quite similar, and there's a few other related questions to this that we might come into as well.
I think for me, I think that people put a lot of weight on a party dynamic. I usually ask my players to try to pick different classes if they can, but I don't want to squash anybody's dream character. For example, I mean, if you take Drakenheim, we have never had a healer in our party, and at no point have we sat down and gone, well, somebody's got to play a healer, because it's like, no, none of like. I love clerics, but I didn't feel like I wanted to play one for these campaigns. Nobody did. So we don't have one. And if 3 people, if your whole table gets together and you have this weird group, it's like you're all going to play spellcasters, then awesome. Make it a spellcasting wild campaign. Some people like to talk about it, so I do bring it up during session 0. I'll say, what's everybody playing? Is everybody cool with that? I've just started doing a session 0, a long-term session 0. We haven't actually had it, but we've started a discussion with a new group. And one of the players was like, what is everybody else playing? And I told him, and he said, I think I'm going to play a barbarian because it sounds like we need a frontline fighter. And I said, do you want to play a barbarian? And he said, yeah, I've always wanted to play one. And I said, good, then let's do it. But I'm like, don't be deterred by what everybody else is playing. Play what you want to play what's going to make you happy. And I think that's more important. The game of D&D will work regardless of the party composition, and you as a DM can find interesting and creative ways to challenge and use the party dynamic in fun ways.
That said, I do think there is value in coming to a session 0 with 2 or 3 ideas. for various characters that you would be excited and love to play. Because sometimes you might have an idea for a character and it still isn't the right fit or the best place for that idea, whether it's because of the campaign or like, because there's more than just the other players. Like, it could be the campaign. Like, if you want to play a like if you have a very, very character driven idea and you want to like really explore your character's backstory and everything like that, and your dungeon master's like, yeah, well, I'm gonna run Dungeon of the Mad Mage, you might want to hold off on that character that's going to have like a really like politically intrigue driven sort of backstory idea, because you might not get that in Dungeon of the Mad Mage. So there are certain character concepts where like you do have to go into a back and forth with your dungeon master about what to expect from the campaign and like what to do. And maybe there are some concepts that you will enjoy more if you wait this time and match the right idea. At the end of the day, though, I think that you shouldn't worry about it too much. I think that it's more about being flexible and being open to ideas. And the only thing not to do is come into a session 0 or come into a campaign and be like, I am playing this character. This is their backstory. This is everything. I want this, and this, and you've made all your decisions and they are locked in stone, and you're going to be upset if you don't get all of those things, because that's a little inflexible. Like, I remember a while ago I was running games on Roll20, and like one of the really weird things about Roll20 nowadays is that like it's hard to get into a game, and people like write application forms to get into Roll20 games. And they come in with like this masterfully presented character as if that's going to get them into the game. And maybe it does. Maybe that's how Roll20 works now. I don't know what the community's really like. But like, I remember being intimidated by that and being like, you know, maybe let's be a little bit more flexible about what our character ideas are so that we can jam something that's going to be cool and unique.
What I'm getting from this is we actually land somewhere in the middle. So when you show up to session 0, don't play something you don't want to play, but be open to expanding on your ideas. And I think actually one thing that is important is somebody, I don't know if I can see it now, but I saw it earlier. Somebody had said something along the lines of like, it can be a bit of a bummer if you're all filling the same role. Now, the cool thing here is if you look at Untold Tales, we have a few examples of the entire party playing the same class, but separate subclasses. And even in the wizard one, something that we did discuss and something that I think is valuable is if everybody wants to play a spellcaster, the party, you need to set a precedent for the party and be like, if you guys are all going to play spellcasters, make sure you're generally choosing different spells and maybe mixing it up a bit. Unless you want a table where everybody's just fireballing all the time, that could be cool too. I don't know.
I think actually probably a party that solves all their problems with all 4 wizards casting fireball on the first round of combat is going to be pretty effective.
Yeah.
Thinking about that a little bit more.
So, you know what? I might even go back and say, you can all play the same class without stepping on each other's toes. And actually, sometimes playing the same class, you can really feed off of each other. And if you look at the Untold Tales, the examples where we played the same class, we all played extremely different characters. And it was still super fun.
Yeah.
So it can work. Anything can work.
Yep. Patrick M asked, what do you do to kick off a campaign in terms of intra-party character relationships for the first session? Do characters have to have at least one tied to another character to better glue the party together? Are there other key ways to get the party aligned and moving together from the very first session? And Robert G asked a similar question about like characters' backstories, how much interaction and Q&A should the PC and DMs have with each other? Everything fits, albeit loosely, leave room for the DM to build on it, or how does this go? Asking specifically back to Dungeons of Drakenheim Season 1 with Kelly and Jill's PCs in reference to that. And I think I'm going to kick off and say there are other ways to get the parties aligned, but they're all more work for you as the Dungeon Master. But when you make the players do it, it's less work for you, and it greatly increases party cohesion.
I remember in one of the last campaigns Monty ran for us off camera, we were trying to decide our connection to each other, and we ended up coming up with an idea that we were all a wedding party. And it ended up being one of the most fun levels 1 to 5 that we ever ran. And it was literally, we were a wedding party. It was all the groomsmen and the groom traveling across the country on their epic pub crawl. And they had to get a present for the bride. They had to get the prize horse. They had to pick up the cake. They had to get suits made. And they were traveling from city to city, stopping in each pub and collecting these items. And then they ended up meeting with a wacky wizard that was was against them for some reason. There was a rival who was upset and wanted to marry the same woman that Joe's character was marrying and was angry at us, so was trying to spite us at every turn. And it was the introduction to a much larger and scarier campaign. But what ended up happening is through those levels 1 through 5, we bonded so hard as a group that when we got to the real issue in the world, which was a global threat that was happening, it became so much more dire. And not only that, but Monty was so clever in the fact that we got to know each and every city along the way, so that when the world was about to end and we had to watch cities being wiped out, we were like, oh my God, this is horrible. But it was because we made those connections. Now, that's my answer to the questions, or to the gluing the characters together. I think it is really valuable.
Yeah.
To go into Robert Gregory's question, I actually think that the DM and the players should work together very closely during character creation. The DM doesn't need to reveal what they are going to do with the information that's being presented. But I think as a DM for myself, and I know I learned this from Monty, basically, when I would present a character to Monty, I would put 3 things in my backstory that were unanswered questions that my character wanted to find out. And I would leave that. And Monty would ask me specific questions. He would say, can you expand on this a bit more? Can you give me a name to the NPC that did this? Can you tell me more about this part of your backstory? And through that dialogue, I knew that meant that Monty was now working to weave the parts of my story that mattered to me into the campaign. And for Dungeons of Drakkenheim, my backstory was relatively loose on things that came into fruition within that campaign. I don't want to give too many spoilers because there might be a few people in here that haven't seen all of Dungeons of Drakkenheim, but my character was very interested in the events involving his mother, the ties that he had to his childhood friends, and his connection to the meteor. Those were the 3 things that I gave Monty. And to see most of that come out in the campaign was really fulfilling for me. And I think that's important, is as a player, I got to work with Monty on my backstory, and Monty got to deliver something that satisfied me so much as a player, because I got to see simple things that I put in there, like what's up with my mom, get answered in a way that I never anticipated and become a part of the story that mattered.
This kind of feeds into the next question from Seth V, which was a question for me particularly of what the process I go through in incorporating my players' backstories into my games. During character creation, how do you strike a good balance of what the player wants and what would fit in the world? So my process for this and how this kind of interacts in this whole thing is, the questions that I always want to ask my players is, what is the fantasy that you have for your character? What is your vision of why you think this character is awesome and what you want to achieve with that character? I would love to give an example of what this conversation was that I had with Jill, Joe, and Kelly, but they're all gigantic spoilers. And in particular, all that to say is, yesterday, Kelly and I were filming new episodes for the YouTube series, and we had a half hour, 45-minute long conversation about Wilhelm. And Kelly was just telling me about like, I really wonder how this element of my backstory that we haven't gotten into in the campaign yet might come into play. And when your players start to do that, you just listen. Right? You just listen and you just nod. And like sometimes I go, oh, well, like it started because there was a conversation of like, I was trying to ask, like, I was redoing the map and Kelly was like, so this is where Wilhelm was born. I'm like, yeah, that is. And we started to kind of just talk about that and how that played into all sorts of things. And I had a conversation with Jill, for instance. Jill has made a character that has 10 children. And we were having a conversation about all the ways that her children might be relevant, her character's children might be relevant in the campaign. And some of those even bordered on like, one of the things that's not a spoiler, maybe not, but like one of the things that Jill asked me was, she said, I would love for you to have my character's children involved in the campaign, but please don't kill one of them. Like, let's make that a conversation. I was like, great. I can work with that. And I'm glad that you told me that you don't want to have one of your characters children getting killed necessarily a thing right off the bat. Like, that was actually like to go back onto one of the first drafts of the first 3 episodes of Shadows of Drakenheim actually did involve one of Rudy's kids getting killed. And the conversation that I had with Jill was like, I don't want to go there yet with this character. So I didn't do it. I respected what she said in that respect. And then we've got lots of crazy stuff planned with Wrath and Joe and Bruce and all that stuff and figuring out that, like, so it's a huge process. It's a combination of having big conversations with your players during session 0 and ongoing conversations through the campaign and understanding, what your players are excited about. If you're guessing what your players are excited about, there's no need. You don't have to guess. You don't have to be secret. Just listen to your players. Just ask them, what are you excited about for your character? And listen and nod and go, right? And then sometimes you can ask like leading questions of like, okay, so what was your character's mother's name? And you're like, oh, okay. And what does your character know about, their great uncle? Okay. And then you just like, you're literally just stacking your deck with plot stuff that you can build off of. So don't shy away from it. The conversations lead you to good places, and then your players will come to you afterwards and be like, I did not know that inconsequential conversation that we had back in September is the energy that is informing this entire plot arc.
Yeah. And I it's funny that like I wish we could say more, but like I was astounded by the little threads that I handed to Monty and the way that you ran with them. And like, man, I suspected some of them were coming, but it was still, the payoff was huge.
Yeah. And it is. It's a big payoff, and binding the party together like thicker than glue, thicker than blood is so worth it. It just is. Like, I don't think I will ever run a campaign again where like the player characters don't know each other prior to the campaign, because having run now a dozen campaigns based on that model, it just works so well.
Those asking for spoilers, so I'm not going to spoil this, but I'm going to say enough that I think the people who know will get it. My favorite thing that happened with Sebastian Crow is, in my backstory, I had written the reason I got expelled, which is said early on in the campaign. The reason I got expelled from the Mages Academy was because of a spell that went awry and caused people to go missing. And the way that's all that I gave Monty. And I said, somewhere out there are the people that were in that room with me. And the way that played out was so insane and so beautiful for me.
Yeah. So it's a process. You just have to engage with it. And I mean, all of this stuff sounds super meta, and it's all like conversations that happen away from the game table. They happen in our Discord chat. They happen like we have our own Discord group chat for everyone, and we talk about this stuff constantly between each other. And yes, it is a little bit meta, and I would say we're probably going the extra leg because we know that we're streaming our game and we're trying to make like a good story as well. But this is all stuff that you can use in a regular campaign, and even though you don't necessarily know what's going to happen next, it gives you ideas. And talking about other people, it's fundamentally it's brainstorming. It is literally just brainstorming.
Now I guess we're moving into new players and role playing.
Yeah.
Let's start with Greg McElroy. How do I get people at my table who are not comfortable with role-playing a character out of their shell? My family has high school and college theater experience, and that helps us role-play, but it may overwhelm our other players. The fact is, I'll answer this first. So the fact is that not everybody is going to be as crazy as like Jill, Joe, and I are at the table, or even as crazy as Monty is at playing his NPCs. That we purposely dial it up to 11 because we know that there's cameras rolling, and because we picked people who love role playing. But at my home game, there are 2 or 3 people at the table who love role playing. They talk in their character voices. They do that. There are other players at the table who go the route of my character is going to say this, and then they say what they're going to say. Or my character's going to do this, and then they do what they're going to do. And that's fine. That is okay. The fact is that role-playing takes many forms. And really, at the end of the day, what you want is you want your players to engage with the story. And even there's a difference between not role-playing and not engaging. Role-playing takes many forms. If a role player is sitting at the table, watching the story take place, and says, my character is upset about that, that's still role-playing. It's not them going, well, I'm upset and blah, blah. Like, no, they don't need to do that. But if they say, my character's upset about what just went down, that's still them participating in the fiction of the game. And I also found that if you want other people to role-play, never force them to do it. But the more people around the table who are doing wacky voices and doing zany things, the more the other people at the table are going to feel free to participate in that way. But if they don't, just encourage them to participate in the game, and that's enough.
I'll also say we got a great video on this that is one of our criminally underwatched videos on the channel, I feel, called How to Get Your Players to Roleplay. And we talk about it from a new player perspective. The biggest advice is be patient. It takes some people time. Lead by example. And not everybody is interested or wants to roleplay to the same extent that you see on live stream games. It's just it is a skill. It is a performative skill. And so that is okay. And role-playing is not the same as acting. Okay? It's not. Role-playing is performative. And you are performing when you role-play. But it's not the same as acting. It's not the same as adopting a mannerism. It's not the same as putting on a voice or gesticulating or even wearing a costume. Role-playing is about making interesting choices. It's about making choices based around what would this person do in this situation. And so as long as someone is making interesting choices, they are role-playing. And as long as they're thinking through those sorts of things, they are role-playing. So just because they're not monologuing doesn't mean they're not role-playing.
Yeah. As long as they're engaging with your story, you're doing a great job, and they're doing a great job, and you should congratulate them for that.
Yeah. Because, silly voices, some people will hurt their voices doing a silly, hurt their throat doing a silly voice.
Most of my voices sound the same.
Yeah, most of mine. And like, I tell you, like, I got to call up some of my old vocal coaches from my undergrad and get some lessons again, because, even for me, that I enjoy doing it. Like, I find one of the things about doing a voice and doing a mannerism is it's a technique called a vocal mask. And so one of the barriers to role playing can be that people sometimes feel that they and their character are a complete overlap. And so because they overlap one-to-one, if my character does something embarrassing, that means that I'm doing something embarrassing. If my character is embarrassed, that means that I am embarrassed. If my character is a fool, that means that I am a fool. And that's actually not true. You and your character are this interconnected thing, right? Like your character is a puppet. Your character is a proxy. Your character is the thing that you control. And one of these exercises that we've done in performance classes is when you do mask work. When you put on a mask, like if you've ever put on a Halloween mask, immediately like you feel like you can act differently because the mask is concealing your face. You are not you anymore. You are that mask. Well, one of the interesting things about like that you can learn through acting techniques is that you can actually achieve the effect of wearing a mask through physical gesture and control of your voice. So, for example, when I do the Rat Prince, I am wearing a mask. I am putting on a Rat Prince mask. It's just that I bring the shoulders up and lean forward and go, yes, yes, yes. And now, like, I'm capable of being a psychopath because I'm wearing the vocal mask of the Rat Prince.
I think like somebody brought up that like a lot of my voices are the same. They're just my voice. Like honestly, Wilhelm is the root of 90% of my character voices. I just kind of start to talk like this, and it's actually all derived from Deckard Cain from the Diablo. I'm Deckard Cain. Stay a while and listen. That's like I used to love pretending to be Deckard Cain. So that became the root of a lot of my voices. But somebody brought up here, my speech patterns change. And that's a really easy way to do it. And when I'm playing Sebastian, I always, when I'm getting into character for Sebastian, I literally just raise one eyebrow. And then I'm just like, I'm Sebastian Crow, and I can take this or leave this. And I don't know, there's been an incident. What's the worst that could happen? When I go into Wilhelm, I slow it down a bit and I think clearly about what I'm going to say. And I adopt that sort of Deckard Cain voice, and I think much clearer about the way that I'm going to approach each and every situation. So really all that I did there is change the pattern and added like a little bit of higher, lower. And I love doing voices, and not everybody's going to, but like you can do a lot by just thinking, what's a speech pattern change? Do I talk slower, faster, higher, lower? And that'll be enough. And if you don't want to do it, you don't have to. Yep. Nobody's going to judge you. Don't do it if you don't want to.
A facial expression is enough to create the semblance of wearing a mask. It does it like that again. Like that's the Rat Prince sort of thing. It's like you kind of like bring your mouth up and like something with your eyebrows or your eyes, like raising your eyebrows like this makes you act differently. Sometimes even just smiling, like over smiling or over enunciating your words can be enough to achieve the effect. Posture is a huge thing. There's a difference, like if you sit up straight and elongate your spine versus slouching over. That will change how you act. And like if you want to play a big fighter, all you need to do is puff out your chest. And if you puff out your chest, you are now the fighter. You are now Jupiter Jones. And that's all it takes, right? Like that's it. You immediately feel the power. Again, this is all acting stuff. Like you spent another favorite exercise of mine is actually like to center a character in a part of the body. So like Jupiter Jones is in the chest, right? But what happens? But Aldo the Immense, he's in the stomach, right? So Aldo the Immense is yes. And of course you can have wonderful characters that are centered in the crotch or the groin. But you can also have characters that are centered in the feet or the hands or the nose in interesting ways. So these ideas, if you really want to take your role playing to the next level, take acting classes, but you don't have to. These are the Coles Notes version. They're enough for it to have fun at your game.
Apparently that question got us talking a lot.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
that was really fun. I love role play. It's one of my favorite parts of the game. Let's move on though to Kevin Allen. If you are DMing with a new player, what would be one piece of advice you give them when thinking of a character concept? Imagine you had limited time or did not want to overload them with info.
I would say to them, what are your favorite characters from fiction, video games, movies, and other media that you've enjoyed? And maybe I would expand that by saying, like, what is your favorite character from fantasy media, at least? And I would guide them to around some of their archetypal favorites and help them make a character that they were excited about that was similar to one of their favorite characters.
I A while ago, I finally got my older brother. He's actually quite different from me. We get along great, but he is the sports guy of the family. I'm the nerd. He's the sports guy. He never considered D&D, but a few months ago, or I guess several months ago now, I got him to play a D&D game, and he was like, "Okay, how do I do this? How do I make a character?" And he has enjoyed Lord of the Rings. So I said to him, "I'm like, who's your favorite character in Lord of the Rings?" And he was like, I think the coolest one was either Gimli or Legolas. And I was like, well, those are two very different characters. Pick one. And he's like, I think Legolas. And I was like, all right. So that already gives me an idea on what you're into. And I can use this. This doesn't work for everybody, but I have these pictures in my living room. I have 12 pictures. And they're these little circles that say the class. Like there's one for wizard, rogue. I have all 12, and they have a bunch of like little things around them. And I literally brought him over. I'm like, what one of these pictures looks the coolest to you? And he's looking at them and he points to the rogue. And he's like, I like this one. This one looks cool. And I'm like, you just gave me Legolas and a rogue. I know what, like, and then I narrowed it down for him. I'm like, here's some ideas. You should probably play a rogue then. Here are some concepts for you to play around with. And he made his character very easily without me having to get into the rules of D&D. I was just able to be like, what do you like in fantasy?
Maybe we should do a video where we go through that technique.
Yeah.
I wonder if we could do a video where we did it where it was specifically so that a DM could just show it to another player and just be like, just watch this video, follow the steps, you're gold.
Somebody wants me to show the class pictures. They're out in the living room. I will take a picture of them and post it in Discord for anybody that wants to see them. I will do that later.
And share the artist as well. Yeah, maybe we'll post it in the description too of the video and just say.
Yeah.
Because I think they're really cool. I've seen them when I've been over at your place.
Yeah, I love them. They had a special deal for all 12, and I was like, well, can't just get one or two.
Yeah. What was the entire process? Dan the GW asked, what was the entire process for coming up with your characters for all the one-shots for the Untold Tales of Drakkenheim? What advice do you have for DMs that want to run a campaign similar to your one-offs where everyone is required to be of very similar classes? How do you encourage and get players to still be very unique characters? I'm going to lead off and say part of the reason why it worked was because it was a one-shot.
Yeah. The way that I create a character for a one-shot is vastly different from the way I create a character for a campaign. When I create a character for a campaign, like I said earlier, I'm giving Monty tons of notes, tons of backstory, and tons of elements for him to weave into the story. When I create a character for a one-shot, so a campaign is a novel. A one-shot is a punchline to me. I create a character who is a punchline.
Yeah.
Jerry Riggs was a punchline. I didn't care about what he did before or what he does after. All that I cared about is what was his goal and how zany can I be. It's my chance to play something with no restraints. Yeah. It's just like most of the characters that you saw me play were zany weirdos. And I had so much fun doing that. And so I think a one-shot is your opportunity to pick a race and class that you've always wanted to try but never really felt like committing to, and come up with a character trait that is super fun to latch onto. And that's it.
Yeah. With that, like, if you want to do a campaign where all the players are playing one class, you're probably going to need to, that's going to need to come from the players. Like your players will probably need to come to you and say, we would like to play a campaign where we are all wizards, or we would like to play a campaign where we are all dwarves. But if you told them from the outset, I am going to DM a campaign for you where you all must be dwarf fighters, and you're like, so I'm going to sign up for a campaign where all of us have to play dwarf fighters for like a year. I think I actually think that would be a cool campaign. It totally would be, but not everyone's down for it, and your players might not be down for it either. So it works really, really well as a one shot, and you might warm your players up to the idea with the one shot, and you might have to like really get into it to really convince people that it's worth it. And being very unique characters, I think that players that have played a couple characters eventually learn how to make a unique character regardless of what their class is, right? I think that's just the thing. It's just player creativity. Like, it is a matter of like experience and applying. Like, if you applied all the logic that we took with the main Drakenheim characters and did that with a party that were all the same class, you get great results. I don't think there's anything else that you have to do beyond convincing everybody to do it.
Aaron Mack asks, when you go to create a character, you go in knowing what you want, or do you just have a loose concept and let the dice rolls determine the final character?
I mean, we don't roll for stats. We do a default array ourselves. And we don't do we don't do any sort of like, even when we did roll, we didn't do any of the fixed roll stuff. So I think I would just say that when we go to create a character for a campaign, we come in with a multitude of concepts, and it's not the die rolls that determine what concept it is. It's more about the party and the campaign and that dynamic, right? Yeah. I still think there's got to be room for the character to grow.
One thing that's interesting for me is I find that I actually go into character creation with a concept of who the person is before I've even picked the class. I might pick my race. I usually pick my race first and decide who the character is. Like, for example, Wilhelm started off as a cleric, was a blood hunter, was a different type of rogue, was a ranger for a bit, and then came back to rogue. So what happened is I was trying to find what class best suited my character concept. And it was kind of a weird journey for Wilhelm, but yeah, Wilhelm's story came before I made any decisions mechanically.
Nice. All right. Okay. So we have Blake D asked us, when creating a character, when does playing against stereotype go too far? And do you think that being too creative with coming up with a character against stereotype can be debilitating, i.e. a half-orc wizard or a gnome barbarian?
Again, because if you put your highest attribute into the best stat, anything will work. And I think playing against type, honestly, I've seen so many zany characters in my day, and they're all fun. Like, I had some of my best times with Jerry Riggs and Chud. And Monty, you might actually remember this. We played in a like public game, and somebody came to the table. I think they were playing a warlock, but they came with cookies, and they were like a motherly figure that was like, "Here, dear, have a cookie." And like, I forget who we were playing with, but like, there was a girl that came to our table, and she was like, "I'm a warlock, but I'm a motherly figure, and I carry cookies."
I remember this. I think
with
this was
me everywhere.
At a convention play, or maybe it might have been something with Unite the Factions. It was definitely an Adventures League thing.
They were playing so against type. I forget exactly the character concept, but I just remember having so much fun listening to them be that character, and they had so much fun being that character. The fact is, I don't think you can go too far with playing against type. The trick here is, for me, Playing against type, you still want to make a competent character. Don't play against type and give your fighter a low stat in both strength and dexterity and then expect and be like, well, they're just a weak little gnome. But if you play a gnome that still has a really, really good dexterity and is an archer fighter, you're going to be awesome. And or if you're playing a gnome barbarian and you give them high strength, cool. I would still say you want to make a competent and well thought out character, but play against type. Make it zany, make it wild, make it fun. That's why we're here, to play D&D and play it the way we want to play it.
I think that the only things that you don't want to impair too much with making an off-type character are make sure that your character is still cooperative when working with others, willing to take risks, and capable in some way, shape, or form. I think that one thing to note is that with the Untold Tales of First Light, when Kelly played Chud, that character was incompetent, but the incompetence of that character was flavored so that he was actually competent. So there's ways to do it, like, you know.
Chud was my example, and I'm glad that there's so many Chud fans out there. I want to thank all of the Chud fans because I didn't know if it was going to work. But Chud was me trying to prove that you can play the not even the anti-hero, the non-hero,
the reluctant hero.
The reluctant hero without jeopardizing the mechanics of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think I did a good job. I think Chud did a great job of showing that role play is the key.
Yeah.
Don't take away from your mechanics. Just role play it the way you want to role play.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to, you really do have to like come into it with still the core premise that Dungeons and Dragons is a teamwork based game.
Right. I'm watching the chat, and the Chud love is getting to me.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And just to note, we're starting to get some questions in chat. We're almost to the end of our patron submitted questions, so we should be able to get back to some of those. But just hold off on asking too many extra questions for just a few minutes, and we should be able to get to a couple more chat questions as well.
Saltor asks, "What's your advice for choosing flaws and personality traits for a character that are interesting and non-trivial, but that don't end up being a burden on your party?" Auntie, what do you think?
Well, I think it does follow into, be cooperative, be competent, and, be willing to take risks. But then sometimes you might have to twist those flaws around so that they result in interesting things. I think that part of the other thing is read the room and know the dynamic at your table. The limit of character flaws is what causes interpersonal conflict amongst the group. Right? Like, you can kind of go as far as you want with character flaws as long as everyone in the group is on board with it. But as soon as like you're actively antagonizing the other players with it, or like causing an interpersonal problem at the table, then you've gone too far.
I'm going to use Sebastian Crow as my example here for flaws, because there is a very fine line, and I think that it's important to separate a flaw that impacts the characters at the table negatively is not going to be great. For example, your flaw is you steal from the other players, probably not going to be fun for the other players. But Sebastian's flaw was that he's overconfident. He's cocky. He thinks that he can handle any situation. Hence his line, "What's the worst that could happen?" And Sebastian's flaw gets the party into some bad times, but we all have fun doing it because we've all bought in with that idea. So like when we're standing there and he's like, "Oh, what's the worst that could happen?" and walks straight into a trap or a room or something stupid, it's jeopardizing him and making the party go, "Oh man, we have to save Sebastian again," which is part of the fun. That's a fun flaw for me. But if I was like, "Oh, what's the worst that could happen?" and cast Fireball on my party because I don't care, like if that's my flaw, that I'm like, I just don't care and I'm going to cast, I don't care about their lives, or like something that puts them in jeopardy, something that takes away from their abilities to do what they want to do, that's going to be a bad flaw. Make the flaw about you and make it silly for what you're going to do.
Yeah, like flaws that embarrass your character are great flaws, right? Like your character having a unhealthy obsession with a specific kind of treasure, right? Or your character just has a very specific ideological belief that is kind of funny and ridiculous. Or even just having appetites, like characters that have appetites for certain things like food or alcohol or sex. Those things can get your character into trouble and can be interesting. Again, be measured with all those things. Like if you want to play a character who's a bit of a horn dog, you better not start being a creep to the other players at the table, right? So it's and you know, if you want to play a character who is greedy, if your character's greed extends to stealing from the other players at the table, then you've got a problem. So it's about figuring out how do you direct those traits in a certain and interesting way that gets your character into comedic trouble, right? Without necessarily making it a problem.
If you remember, one of my favorite play into a flaws, and this is from an old campaign when I was playing Dax, and Dax was afraid of spiders. And there was a scene where you got me, I was covered in spiders. And so I didn't jeopardize the party, but I ran out of, I think it was a barn that I was in, that I got covered in spiders. And I ran out and I burning handsed myself to get the spiders off of me. And I like burned all of my clothes off. And there was just a scene of my character like running naked through a field screaming, like singed eyebrows and singed hair, burned clothes burning in the wind, because you covered me in spiders. And I was like, that's what my character's flaw is. He hates insects and he's covered in spiders. So yeah, I'm going to cast burning hands on myself. It was a bad time, but it was good. It was so good. And the party loved it because I didn't jeopardize them. I jeopardized me, and I put me as the emphasis of the flaw.
Yeah, you were also playing the character at the time that was always willing to drink the mysterious liquid that the party found.
Yeah. That was a good time as well.
So our last couple,
tasted. Yeah.
So our last couple of questions here concern actually DMs as players. CMAC asks, for one of my games, the DM and half of the players are first-time D&D players. How can I help the DM out in-game? I try to, for example, I try to quietly play Peacemaker between the takes it way too seriously and the everything is a joke players, or pull us back if we start to get off track talking movies or video games. What else can I do until she finds her own way of handling things? First of all, the trickiest thing with this is do not undermine the DM. Don't in your well-intentioned, totally well-intentioned desire to help undermine the dungeon master. So I think that talking to the DM before the game about specific ways that you can help, so the DM knows that you're offering your help and how you're going to help, is actually really great. So like if you want to say, hey, you know, I'm willing to be here and track initiative and help you track hit points, and I'll have my laptop open to D&D Beyond, and I'll be the one that's responsible for looking up rules and stuff like that. So make it really specific how you're going to help, instead of assuming that your dungeon master needs help with a specific thing. Even though your dungeon master is new and is learning the ropes, sometimes every dungeon master needs to find their style, and there's some mistakes that can only be learned by making them.
I think something else that's important is like when your DM is doing their DMing, pay attention. It's so important, and like that helps. And if somebody else at the table isn't paying attention, You as the player can be the one to be like, guys, bring it in. Something that I hate as a DM. I, any DM, any DM out there knows that they have a lot to take care of. They have a lot in front of them. They're monitoring 20 things at once. They're being the storyteller. They're looking at the monster stats. They're analyzing each and every decision that's being made at that table. They're overseeing a lot. The one thing I don't feel needs to be added to my stresses at the table is trying to get people to engage in the game and like be like, hey, can you stop being on your phone? Hey, why are you guys chatting? I'm trying to set a scene here. And it really actually makes me feel so good when I notice somebody doing that and somebody else at the table goes, hey guys, let's pay attention. And I'm like, good, I'm focusing on a lot of things right now. So thank you. Thank you for getting the other people into the game. That's the biggest help you can give a DM.
Totally.
Is just get people to participate, and you yourself don't take away from what the DM is offering. Even if they're a new DM, they might struggle with setting a scene. They might struggle with their vocabulary. Don't fault them for that and don't get bored with it. Let them do what they're going to do and try to participate with them.
And actually, C-Mac, it actually sounds like from what you're saying in your question that you are already doing that. It sounds like you are helping to direct the focus of the players towards the Dungeon Master, and that is probably the best thing that you can do, right? If it is one of those things of like saying, you know, hey guys, this is super funny, but let's see what the DM, like, let's like defer the focus back. I think about it kind of like making sure that the spotlight is on the DM and that's how you be empowering and supportive. And I think the other thing is like sometimes new dungeon masters do have trouble drawing the line if like things are not working well at during the game. And one of the other things that you can do is if things are kind of falling apart or it looks like the dungeon master is struggling, you can just be like, hey, you know what, everybody? Let's just take a break. I gotta go to the washroom. I just want to grab a snack. And like, you can just say, let's take a break. Everyone like relax. And then maybe you can privately approach the dungeon master during that break and be like, is everything okay? Do you need a hand with something? Like, I didn't want to say anything in front of the group, but I just thought I'd ask for a break and see if you were okay. And that is like, that is, if you need to do if you feel like I need to do an intervention, that's the way to do an intervention without necessarily derailing and seriously undermining the DM. Propose a break in play, approach the DM privately, make some suggestions from there.
Samuel C. asks, as a frequent DM in lore buff, when I get to the player side, I often find it difficult to divide what I know versus what my character would logically know. It's hard not to metagame sometimes, and I was wondering if you had any helpful suggestions in preventing me from doing so.
I struggle with this problem, and I have no good advice for you.
This is tough, and like I will say that it takes practice. One of the funnier things, and you may notice this, I dropped a joke in the last episode of Shadows of Drakenheim, and it was a very purposeful joke that was a little bit meta. And it was, Wilhelm said, well, this couldn't be this way, clearly referring to something that Drakenforce from season 1 knew. And it was funny because that was me trying to play into the fact that, like, obviously people know that me as a person knows this thing, but Wilhelm has to pretend that he doesn't. And it is a challenge. But I think try to always ask the question, what does my character know? Like, we actually have a lot of fun with this. You're going to notice Joe has a lot of fun with this, with trolls in season 1 of Drakenheim. Joe knows damn well how to kill a troll properly. We all know that it's supposed to take fire damage in order to stop it from regenerating. Joe playing into the, I've killed plenty of trolls, and then we get to the troll and we're all like, Joe, like, or Pluto, set it on fire. And he's like, what? And like him having that revelation of being like, oh, that's how this works. that was him having fun with playing against what he knows. So I actually think if you're struggling, make it into a comedy sketch. Go the opposite way. Make your character not know that thing. And then it becomes funny at the table. And that's the only advice that I have, because really it is a work. It takes work, it takes effort, and it takes you calculating each and every moment to be like, does my character know this?
Yeah. I mean, I also think that metagaming is way less of a problem than the internet would have you believe. Like, straight up, it's, in most cases, metagaming is not a huge problem. Because there's a difference between metagaming and cheating, right? I think most of what the internet takes issue with as metagaming is cheating, and I actually do think it's important that we draw a distinction between metagaming that is cheating and metagaming that is just using that is out of character knowledge. I also find as a player, I really struggle with the information relationship, because I as a player am generally someone who wants a lot of information from the dungeon master, and I start making assumptions if I don't get that information. And so that's why when I play, I tend to play characters like wizards and bards, because I just can't stand it when I can't get the like, you know, and and unfortunately, like, you know, on the whole, as a player, I've played with more bad DMs than good ones, Kelly being the notable exception. You know, Kelly is by a country mile the best DM that I've ever played under myself. So, you know, that struggle of actually not having the opportunity to play with a lot of good dungeon masters is part of why, you know, I just, like, I love DMing. I love having the info in front of me anyways. So, like, for me, it's one of those strange things where it's like, yeah, it's hard for me to let go. I like the power too.
This last question that we have from the patrons, this one is very specific and appropriate for what we just went through. Dustin P asks, after a long span without playing a character, what tips do you have for getting back into character? I guess I'll start with this one because I literally just had to jump back into Wilhelm's shoes.
Yeah. Might be quite relevant for lots of people who have had their campaigns on hold.
Yeah. For those of you in Discord, you might notice that I started a lot of conversations with you guys, specifically about, like, what was your favorite things about Wilhelm? And that was actually part of my thing, but not everybody gets to do that. So first of all, and if you haven't done this, I apologize, because this advice might not help you because it took some foresight. I have detailed notes about Wilhelm. I have notes about his personality. I write down things that I say during a game that I think are good quotes by Wilhelm, that really are powerful quotes that attach to his character. And I have a note that has all of his rules, as well as things like, okay, let's see. Wilhelm, I certainly hope that wasn't your best move. On guard. What else do I have? I have fencing terms written down. Terms and phrases that I like. Berries. I have written here. Berries. It's a positive, old school term that means desirable or pleasing. Example, that sounds like berries to me. That I grabbed off the internet, I wrote it down, and now it's kind of in there. I have, like, all of these quirks, his backstory. I have a detailed note, and I'm always adding to it. So, in the week leading back up to playing Wilhelm, I read through this thoroughly, and I actually would, and I'm not going to lie, like, I was in the shower, and I would just sit there and be like, my name is Wilhelm Wolfsbane. I'm Wilhelm Wolfsbane. My name is Wilhelm. On guard. I'm Wilhelm. On guard. That sounds like berries to me. And I would just do that. And I would read over my notes. And so, like, keep notes about your character.
Yeah.
And if you
take notes, that is the biggest thing. We, as our game and our stream, we have a killer advantage, though. Our games are recorded.
Yeah, I can go back and watch.
So we can go back and watch, right? And so I would actually hazard that that alone is kind of cool, and it has made me think about I will actually say, I think of everybody, I think I probably go back and watch the episodes the least of everybody else.
I watch a lot of
because you've gone back and
episodes.
rewatched them all. I know Jill has. I know Joe's rewatched some of them, but I don't as much as everyone else. But I think that's also because like I have my own notes, right?
Yeah.
And so that it does help to take diligent stuff with that, and also I rely on my players to remind me of that. So with the other thing that you can do, like for those of you that are getting your campaigns back up and going, and it's been a while, one of the things that we did this off air, but we had a group call. I think we got on for about 2 hours, and we just talked about the campaign. We just talked about how things had gone. We talked about what had happened. We reviewed the names of key NPCs, and then we shared the notes with each other. And that was actually helpful. One of the other cool things too that we did do that helped us was, I think that actually playing that Untold Tales Bigger Than Ducks helped a lot. It kind of like buoyed the whole thing and gave us like a jumping off point. So one interesting thing for those of you that have your campaigns on hold and bringing them back, maybe instead of diving right back in where you left off, do like a side story, one shot dungeon, like 5-room dungeon thing that is like not entirely canon. Like, you know how like a bunch of animes do like those flashback arcs where like it's clearly filler to fill out the manga, but like they just do a filler arc of like a couple episodes, and you're like, but Goku's charging up his power. But no, sorry, you're gonna watch 5 episodes of filler. Well, maybe have a filler episode to give to get everybody back into the whole feeling of things. It's a good placement, right? So that might be a great strategy.
And like something that we just hinted at here, but I think to make it more specific for those of you who don't have the benefits of a live stream, because like we said, we can go back and watch our stuff anytime, which really helps. But for those of you who don't, the key part is to have a conversation with everybody. Get the whole team together, not to play, but like do a video chat and just be like, guys, where were we in the campaign? And what was interesting is I'm pretty sure I know the whole campaign. So when we got into that call, I was like, all right, guys, here's how it's gone. And as I was telling the story, Joe would be like, oh, that's where this happened. I was like, oh my God, I forgot about that. And then Jill would be like, yeah, and then this happened. I'm like, oh my God, I forgot about that. And through the conversation, we all started puzzle piecing different bits together. So do that together. If you've been apart for a few months, do a call and just be like, guys, let's do an hour-long call, recap the campaign up until this point, and everybody's going to fill in everybody's holes that they have in the story. Each person is going to have different parts that they remember about the story, and it's going to make a complete package, at least enough that you're ready to jump back in.
Yeah. So did we do them all?
Yeah.
I think we got there were a few folks, and I tried to leave a message on for our patrons following along. We did get a few questions this time that related to more DM, like very, very like non-character related DM stuff. So I did send a message to a few of you that submitted questions that I wanted to hold for a DM related episode. So for those of you that did, we've got those in the docket. We'll come back to those ones in the next Q&A. And there were a few questions that we did combine. So, but I think otherwise we got through almost I think that's them all. A massive thank you to all of our patrons who submitted some really cool questions for us to go through. I guess we can grab some bonus questions from the Twitch chat now, and whether they're follow-up questions from any of our patrons or anyone that's joined us in Twitch. Let's see what we got. We already got a few.
Gav asks, are there mechanical aspects to particular builds that you would find particularly tricky to work into roleplay? When raging as a barbarian for mechanical reasons, role-playing into it is difficult for me.
Well, you just might not be a very angry person.
The thing is, Uh, Actually, when I think of the Barbarian's Rage, I think to Harmon Quest. And whenever their barbarian went into a rage, they would do like a little jig and a dance as their muscles like built out, and then they would like be singing a little jig as they chopped off heads. And really, it's like it's I find if I struggle with something, the best route to go is comedy. And I know that's not always the answer, but like if you are struggling to role play something, make it funny for your character. That's one of my takes. If there's a mechanic that you're struggling with, um, I like to just think of a way that appeals to me and the way that I want to play it. And it doesn't need to be typical. Think outside the box. Think of anything
Yeah.
that speaks to that.
Reflavor it. Maybe just that mechanic, the flavor, just file it off and find a new way to integrate it into your character in an interest in a way that you actually like. What do the mechanics indicate that you could reflavor and discuss with your DM how you might change that as well? Random Letters 21 asked us, I'm still learning to rein in my influence to the world itself with a backstory. Is there a line you would consider overstepping on your DM's turf with world building? This is a tricky question, I think, Random Letters, because it really depends on the DM and their world building, right? Like there's some DMs where their lines are going to be really specific, and they're going to say yes or no to certain things and yes or no to others. Like you might have a DM that has designed every single noble lineage in their entire campaign world. And if you try to invent a new noble house, they are going to tell you have overstepped your bounds. And that you can't do that. Or you might have a DM that, like, for example, one of the things that many DMs are very hardline on are like, you have to pick one of the deities that they have designed, right? Or you have to find a way to like fit into the religions established in the world in some way, or what's already there. So like I think actually that was one of the things that we really struggled with Kelly and I when we were making Wilhelm's character, was that in one iteration Wilhelm was going to be a cleric. And Kelly and I discussed like how could we make that work with the religions that existed in the world of Drakenheim. And I think that ultimately Kelly found the religions that were existent pretty unsatisfying for role-playing purposes and wanted to diverge from that. And it felt like we were kind of like, it wasn't really jiving in that respect. So sometimes those can be like cosmology stuff can be the line that you draw. Sometimes so as you're creating more and more elements, the question really ultimately is like, what are you as a player willing to revise? And what would you like the DM to add for you?
I think what's important is when you're preparing your backstory, expect your first draft to be a first draft. When you present it to your DM, like Wilhelm, I presented a backstory. This is never going to come up, so I will. It's not a spoiler. In the original backstory, there was an entire arc where we all know. Well, maybe we don't if you haven't watched, but Wilhelm was taken in by Rudy. In the original backstory, I had this entire arc of my backstory where Wilhelm stumbled upon a dwarven farm, and the dwarves took him in, and they helped him get back on his feet. And I submitted that to Monty, and we discussed it back and forth. And Monty kept being like, "Why are these characters important to you?" And I was like, "This, this, this," and he's like, "Okay." And then finally, he came to me and he's like, "Could it be Rudy? Could that be your connection to Rudy?" And I was like, "Yep, yeah, it could be." And I scrapped that part of my backstory and refinessed it so that it now was a character connection. But I had to be open to that. I had to be open to this fact that like I wanted this like dwarf NPC that my character was connected to that was out there in the world somewhere. But I already had a bunch of stuff in my backstory that Monty was able to latch onto, and he's like, "You don't need this. Make it Rudy." Yeah. And so be open to your DM saying, can we change this part of your backstory?
And this is actually a very interesting like conceptual framework that I've been thinking about it as well. And it's called like practice economy of character. So when you as a dungeon master need to invent an NPC, ask yourself, could an existing NPC fill that role rather than creating a new one. Because there's this really interesting theory that, like, in a storyline, there's a limit to how many characters a person can keep track of. And like in playwriting, there was this whole idea that like you shouldn't write a play with more than 6 characters, which is a weird rule, and go tell William Shakespeare that, because he had way more than 6 characters. But like there was this idea that was really dominant for a really, really long time that was like you could have 6 characters in your play because that was the ideal number of like interplays. And I mean, people also had ridiculous ideas that like a play should only happen over in one location in real time. Like in the French, in the early French Renaissance, all the plays, like the style of the plays was like, this play happens over 2 hours in one palace. And that was held up as like the ideal play. And like William Shakespeare's like, I'm not doing that. I'm going all over the place. And I'm here, read my play with 40 characters. So these, there's all these rules that can be broken, but like, I do like this idea of like practicing economy. So when players come to me with NPCs in their backstory, one of the first things that I'm going to do is, okay, my player has asked for a character with these traits. Well, can I economize and combine? And that actually builds stronger links between the characters. So, and often the result of doing that is it takes 2 or 3, sometimes more, weak NPCs and builds one really good one. It's like the Voltron of NPCs. So think about it in that respect.
Megas Fender asks, going back to the question about metagaming and cheating, what are blatantly cheating behaviors in comparison of just metagaming? Knowing monsters info you are not supposed to know? Question mark.
Blatant cheating are dice shenanigans. Blatant cheating would be actually the biggest blatant cheating metagaming thing is reading the module. Right. Yeah. I DM'd an adventure. When I DM'd Tomb of Horrors, for Adventures League, I had a player in the campaign that I knew was reading the module. I knew they were doing it. And it came like, and eventually like it became a problem. Like I was like, whatever, it's Adventures League, I'm not going to worry about it. But it became a problem because now that player, like, yeah, there were other dynamics that were there, but like that ultimately was the straw that broke the camel's back. Like reading the module when the DM is running the module, that is like super cheating. It's reading your DM's notes.
I would also say, like, if you end up on a cliffhanger or something, or like if you pull up monster stat blocks while you know you're going to be facing that monster, to read all the nitty-gritty details. Something that I try to do is, like, I'm well-versed in a lot of monster stat blocks, so I actually do the opposite. If I think I know what's coming, I specifically won't read it because I'm like, I can't remember everything. I can't remember its AC or its hit points. I think it has some sweet abilities, and I'm scared, but I try to avoid doing that so that I can still be entertained.
Yeah, I actually remember an instance when, very early when I started playing with Joe, where I had like a water elemental and it didn't have damage resistance in its monster stat block, but I'd given it damage resistance. And Joe was like, that monster's not supposed to have damage resistance. I'm like, funny you should say that. Right? Like, so that's the DMs can do anything they want with monsters. Anything they want at any time. And they are free to do so. That is their power as the DM. That is their right. And expecting the dungeon master to play by the rules in the monster manual of what are in those stat blocks when the monster manual tells the dungeon master to make changes to them is not cool. That's actually one of the things that actually burns me the most is when players insist that I have to use the rules for a monster as written. No, I will change them as much as I want.
I actually, something that I think you do really well is because you know that I'm well-versed. You never tell me the monster, you just describe something horrible, and like even the audience is guessing. We're guessing. We think we might know, but we're never fully sure. And that's actually more fun for me because that means that like I don't get to just assume I know exactly what's around every corner. It's all just reflavored, and I appreciate that as a player who could have the capacity to metagame.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There was an earlier question that was by Vilcurio asking, do you have any rules or limitations on reflavored races? For example, Tabaxi that's reflavored as a squirrel. And I just wanted to say that Squirrel Tabaxi sounds awesome. Like, Squirrel Tabaxi? Totes! Do it!
Let's see. Is that... Okay, wait, that wasn't the Puka Prime question. I'm playing a multicolored Kenku, and it's a fine line between playing the concept in an interesting and fun way and ruining the game because of the innate complications of the race. How do you feel these type of races and characters can or should play out? I think if it's becoming...
I don't actually know what the complication there is. A multicolored Kenku sounds hilarious and awesome.
Maybe it's that the Kenku's voice.
Oh, the Kenku's mimicry thing? Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's kind of a weird thing to play straight. If I was playing a Kenku, I would say that your character just could say, like, I wouldn't... Yeah, that don't be stringent on that thing.
I don't think anybody should be stringent. The way that I would play a Kenku is that they've lived a life and they've been around people and they've heard a lot of things. So their mimicry ability is actually that they have fully fluent phrases. But what I would do is I would speak in almost common phrases. That would be the fun I would have with it, is like, look up cliche quips and phrases and use a lot of them. And then that's you playing into the Kenku's mimicry ability.
I think that what you could do there is you could take a page out of Wilhelm's playbook, and if you're playing a Kenku, make a list of catchphrases that your character can pull out. And then as long as you like parrot those, you'll create the impression of like if whenever your character encounters a specific thing, they go like, oh, so it goes. And that's always like their like they have some catchphrases for like whatever they're going to do. That could actually be very funny as long as there's enough diversity there to make it play. I think that's cool.
There's a really important question here. Play with Joe TV asks, how does it feel to play with Joe or Wrath, the greatest player of all time? I hate Joe. He's garbage. Never want to play with him again. Moving on.
I think Joe is awesome, and just head and shoulders above another. There's this other guy that I play with, and man.
All right, that's enough. That's enough.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see.
Do we have any more questions?
We got some questions hiding in the chat, for sure.
It really helps if you put like a Q or question before your question. Yes, it makes it much easier for us to find it. I should say that.
Can we get a Bruce T-shirt? I think Jill's working on one.
Yeah, we are. There's actually a idea that we might do a 3 familiar T-shirts. There's going to be. We're trying to decide between Sebastian's Hound or Sebastian's Crow. Technically, the Crow was the familiar, and then there's going to be a Bruce and a Houdini. But we're playing around with those ideas.
James Logan 83, do you suggest to invent new names for the monsters to avoid the players that know all the kind of monsters in the D&D universe? Actually, no, I don't, because that's a lot of work, and fantasy names are already kind of like bogging down your game with a bunch of fantasy terminology is not necessarily like invented terminology might not be useful, because there's a certain clarity that is gained from being able to call a troll a troll. It's the recognition of it. What is valuable, though, is giving good original descriptions for the monsters and introducing them by their description and not by their name, unless it doesn't matter, right? Like, the thing that I do and is, and this is actually an exercise that you can do even if you're not preparing for it directly. Open up a page in the monster manual to a random monster and write a 2 to 3 sentence description in your own words of that monster. And Try to make it and describe it based on the artwork that you see. Don't read what's in the book. Just look at the piece of artwork and tell me what you see in that artwork and write it down. And I guarantee you that this is a process that is called remediation. And so by you taking that artwork and writing a written description of that artwork, there will be elements of it that are recognizable and elements of it that are unrecognizable. You have translated the artwork into words. And so you have now made it into something that exists in the oral, and I say oral as AURAL realm, the hearing, rather than the visual realm. And the act of doing that is transformative and changes the way that your players perceive that creature. Dungeons and Dragons is an oral, and again, oral as in mouth and oral as in AURA, like the ears. That is the medium of expression that we operate in when we play a game of D&D. And so finding ways to use language in new ways will do more than simply renaming them. Once the monster is recognized, then you can use its familiar name to encapsulate that, but the impression of that initial description will linger.
Question here, should anything be different for one-shot character creations? I feel like we may have answered this during the chat, but in case you missed it, the quick answer is to go back on, I think, my statement about one-shot characters is my campaign characters are a novel, my one-shot characters are a punchline. If you're creating a one-shot character, it's your chance to just pick a character quality, like a trait or a flaw or a certain trope, and just run with it. I have a lot less ideas about the past or future with my one-shot characters, and that's basically my go-to for creating a one-shot instead of a campaign character. Forge, or do you have anything to add to that, Monty?
No, I don't. I think that's great.
Forge Mind asks, do you use mind maps for making the character backstories? I love mind maps.
Sounds awesome. I don't.
I don't use them. If you do, it's probably a great way. I come from a background of screenplay writing. I don't write a screenplay for my characters, but I write it out with scenes that have occurred in their backstory. So that's how I usually do it.
Ameriblade, thanks for being a Patreon supporter. Do you know how kick-ass you guys are? No, we don't. We need to be constantly reminded about it. So thank you.
It is really nice to have a group of people who constantly remind us, because we basically meet up every day and we're like, how is this even working? How are we doing this? So thank you to everybody.
Lord Deathfreak wants to know if the season 1 and 2 characters will ever meet each other. We've been talking about this a lot, and we're worried about it because we actually think the season 1 and 2 characters might not get along. So we'll see what happens there.
I think Wilhelm hates Sebastian. I don't think they're going to like each other at all. They have completely opposing views. And Sebastian's a wrecking ball and Wilhelm is calculated, and it's not going to go well.
Yeah. Sticky DeFricky asks, what are your thoughts on scripted losses? Are they bad, or can they be good narrative without making the players feel disappointed? I think they are something you should avoid. I think a scripted loss is really something that you should be very careful with, and you really got to know what you're doing and perhaps have the players on board for it in order for it to work.
The only time in my entire history as a DM that I've scripted a loss of a player character was when that player was moving to Australia and they came for their last game. And I said to them before the game, I'm like, do you want me to leave your character hanging? And he's like, I don't know, do something cool with that. And I was like, there's going to be a situation during this session tonight where there is an obvious option for a self-sacrifice. If you'd like to, you can take it. And so it was his last night. He was moving to Australia for years. And we had a situation where there was a person who was a person was being held captive by magical forces. And the only way to get them out was for somebody else to take their place with the curse that had befallen them. And so that was the end of the session, and he said, I will take on this curse. And he stepped into the cursed area, allowing them to save the person. And that was a very scripted scene that I had put in there. But it was because that character knew that they were leaving, and they wanted something cool for their character. And so we worked on that. But that's the only time I've ever done it. And even then, it felt a little forced.
Related to this, Micromonty asked a question about players do not want their characters captured. Let's say their capture is important to the story. Is it helpful to tell the players that, thus ruining the tension, or let the capture and imprisonment happen and hope for the best? Same answer. You can't. It's got to happen organically. I've captured players several times, and it was never planned. It was always an accident. I always did it. Like you'll actually see that in Dungeons of Drakenheim and Shadows of Drakenheim, the players have lost several times. They've been captured several times, but those were always crazy things that emerged organically out of play and were not things that I was planning to do. So the trick, if you're interested in your players losing, if you're interested in capturing your players, you have to learn and to recognize when the opportunity for this exists and seize it when you see it. Because if you try to force it, it's probably going to blow up in your face. And the players might get upset by it.
I had a situation where my players actually did talk to me. This was early on. We were doing Tyranny of Dragons, and they were in the camp. Now, I still think it was their fault, but they did a very poor job. They decided to disguise themselves and walk straight into the bandit or the cult camp and try to blend in and find out what they wanted to find out. They botched some charisma checks, and I had the entire camp come down on them. And they were upset. They were like, okay, well, there's 40 guards now on us and there's nothing we can do. I guess that's the game. And I'm like, guys, I'm not going to kill you. Like, and it was weird. I learned a lot in that session. I had to be like, they're like, well, I guess this is a total party kill. What choice did we have? I'm like, guys, you had so many choices. You chose to sneak into the camp. You failed some dice rolls. You got recognized. Yeah, you're in a whole camp. They're all on you now. But it was a tough discussion. And I had to be like, they're like, there was no win scenario here. And I'm like, when you started failing dice rolls, no, there was no win scenario. You were in the middle of a bad situation. But I didn't kill them. I captured them. And that felt appropriate. And then they ended up having an epic escape. But there was some sourness at the table when 40 guards came down. But I think what's important there is, like, I didn't script the loss. They went in, create situations where if they do the wrong thing, then it's going to go south.
Yeah.
But don't make it so that there's only one option, and that's losing.
Yeah, the outcomes, there should always be more than one possible outcome. And if you're losing the thread of how it has to go, it's probably like, if you're like, it has to go down this way, they have to lose, then step back and maybe think about the structure of what you're creating and what story you're trying to tell. Because remember, the story is what happens when the campaign is told again. What is a Dungeons and Dragons is a game about a narrative, and it's about asking the players what they would do in that situation. And so if you want to put your players in an interesting scenario where they are captured and they do have to escape, sometimes the best solution is to simply say, hey guys, I want to do that. And because capturing the scenario that is interesting about the players being captured, it's actually not always that interesting that they got captured. It's interesting how they got out. And so maybe sometimes you just skip the capture part and you just say, I want to do this, and go there and give them the opportunity. But I do think it is something that has to happen organically. And I would advise that until you have like players that you have really good trust with and a good rapport with, and that you have a lot of confidence in a DM, in yourself as a DM, I would avoid creating scenarios where you want the players to lose, or where you're going to deliberately try to stage a capture scenario, and that if your campaign is going to completely derail because the players were supposed to lose but they won, or because they were supposed to get captured and they didn't, that's where you have to plan better.
It is 8:00 now, so we have time for a couple. Like, I'll answer one or two more, but we might not have time for everybody. There was just a load of questions, but we are at 8:00. So I'm going to have to kind of cut this soon. I will answer this one quickly. Scripted losses that start the campaign, that's fine. If your characters start in jail, that's cool.
Yeah.
We all love Skyrim.
Yeah.
Or was that Oblivion?
Both.
I
think that's kind of an Elder Scrolls thing.
Yeah. Let's take one more.
Okay.
Monty, I'll let you pick out of the questions here.
Sorry for those really good questions too. There's really a lot of fun stuff. So my apologies to everybody who we didn't get to your questions. Please, if you're on Patreon, please hold them for the next one, because we're starting to get a lot of DMing questions too. So we'll absolutely come back to some of these, hopefully in future ones. I think I want to go with just a really simple one. How do you suggest? This is actually not a simple one, but how do you suggest I improve my improvising for DMing? And I'm just going to go with some really, really simple advice on this one. Read more books. Be familiar with more situations. The more situations and the more stories you are familiar with, the better your ability will be to recognize when you are in a story, right? It's kind of like that quote from Pirates of the Caribbean, you best start liking ghost stories. You're in one. So learn how to recognize the ghost story that you're in, the ghost story that your players have brought you on, and then now you can just play off of that story, right? Borrow things from other media and play off them.
If I can add to that, a great tip for improvisation is listen to what your players are saying at the table. Your players will inspire things that you may not have thought of. Something that Monty and I have talked about before, and Monty taught me and is used against me many times, is if we're sitting around the table and we're like, we hear a noise behind a door, and somebody at the table's like, oh man, I hope that's not a ghost or a bunch of zombies or something, then Monty suddenly is like, oh, well, it was something else, but nope, now it's this. And that's you improvising. Maybe there was nothing behind the door, but your players said something crazy, and they're like, I hope it's not this, or do you guys think this might happen? Listen and pick up on those things, and then either surprise them by doing something different or do exactly what they were afraid would happen.
Yeah.
And that's my advice for improvising.
Amazing. Thank you all so much for your incredible questions. This was a lot of fun. We're looking forward to the next one, which will be in September. We're going to be doing this once a month now. And whether you've enjoyed it with us on Twitch or following with us on YouTube as well, we look forward to hearing more of your questions next time and continuing these really fun and impromptu conversations.
Thank you guys so much. And if you haven't joined our Patreon, please consider doing so that you can partake in the initial questions, and also just join us to ask us all sorts of stuff and get answers from us and our entire amazing community. So thank you to all of our patrons who contributed to this. It's been so amazing and rewarding for us, and we hope it has been for you as well.
Thank you all so much for watching and playing along with us. We will see you next time
in the dungeon.